Thank you for joining us. Please remember to like and to subscribe.
Okay, so we're generally going to be talking about betrayal and arrest in Gethsemane, but John will put a different spin on it, and you'll see that. Okay, and I'm going to go from 18:1 to 19:4 just because that's kind of part of the story. Okay, could somebody read 18:1 through 11?
When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said, and Judas the traitor was standing there with him. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Again, he asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they said. Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. If you are looking for me, then let these men go." This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. "I have not lost one of those you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus, is that it?
I think that's right.
Okay.
Oh, and 11, go ahead and do
Okay.
11, I'm sorry.
Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?"
Okay, thank you. And he's already decided. He's in the garden. He's already decided, I'm going to drink the cup my Father has given me. And that's the big difference in this account of it. But there's a lot of things going on here. John's gospel compared to Matthew, Mark, and Luke's gospel. Remember he's writing 50 years after now. But Matthew, Mark, and Luke focused on the agony of Christ right up to the point where he accepted the cup that was given him. This is different. John ignored that. You won't even hear anything about that in this account. He goes directly to, he's already prayed, and he's going out to meet his accusers. Okay, so he focused on the transformation in Christ's demeanor after he accepted what his Father will is. And like I said, I want you to remember that. He's focused. He's ready to go. He knows what he has to do, and he's going to go do it. And everybody he meets, when he says, "I am he," they fall down. Yeah. What's that all about? We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. Christ now confronts his enemies, and he plainly answers them. He's bold. He's walking toward them, displaying dignity and majesty and authority. Okay, so he's totally different than what we might think of from the other gospels. Okay, from verse 4 onwards, Jesus shows he's in full command of everything that's happening. Everything that is happening when he talks to Caiaphas, Annas, Pilate, he's in control. Okay, when you think about it, we'll talk about this a little more. There's a lot of ways that during this account, Pilate said, "No, you're free, go. I find no fault in this man. You're done." He could have, when Pilate's wife came to him, which is not in this account, it's in Matthew. When Pilate's wife came to him and says, "Don't mess with this man. I've had some dreams about this. You don't want to mess with this man." Pilate could have said, "Go on. You're free. I'm not going to mess with it." There's a lot of different, Annas couldn't find fault. Caiaphas couldn't find fault. They wanted to murder him, but they couldn't say what the charge was. So all through this, Jesus is focused on going to the cross. He's orchestrating it to go to the cross. That is his will. He's going to use this version of 3 events in this account to contrast between several people and issues. And here's the 3 basic events, just so you know what we're going. The actions in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he's going to contrast between Judas and Peter. Okay, so it's you see this, you read it and you don't realize what he's doing, but he is contrasting. The trial before the Jewish priests, don't even talk about Caiaphas in this. He's only mentioned as an afterthought. Okay, they talk about Annas and they talk about Pilate. Don't even talk that he went to Herod in this account, but he did go to Herod. Okay, he's going to contrast between Peter and Jesus. Okay. And John in the last one, Pilate and Caiaphas, which, like I said, Caiaphas is not really an act, but he's going to talk about Jewish priests seem more concerned about ceremonial defilement than killing an innocent man. And we'll talk about how that happened. Okay, so it's very interesting compared to the other gospels. first of all, in verses 1 through 3, Jesus boldly went out. Oh, verse 3, it said, how many people did Judas bring to arrest Jesus? Mentions a cohort.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a cohort is 500 to 600 men. Okay, that's a tenth of a legion, I believe. And cohort can sometimes be interpreted as a tenth of a cohort. So it might be somewhat less than that, or no, a third of a cohort. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
So maybe 200.
500 to 600?
500 to 600, yeah, 500 to 600.
Oh,
The
okay.
way I wrote that, yeah, it is
Yeah,
confusing.
it's like,
Plus temple police, plus a smattering of Pharisees and Sadducees that wanted to come along and see what was going on. So there's 11 disciples of Jesus. Judas is with them on the other side. So the very number of people that he brought indicates that they feared Jesus. They thought he could do something to hurt him. Okay, so
resist.
what's that?
They thought he would resist.
Yeah,
No.
yeah.
And all these people that were supposedly with him would resist.
But instead of resisting, he walks out and says, I'm Jesus. I'm him. I am he. Okay.
And they know he's done miracles.
Yeah.
They do know he's done miracles.
He's threatening to them.
Yeah, you would think Judas would know, because Judas has actually been invested with the ability to do miracles himself when he was a disciple, even though he was not truly a believer. So anyway, the number of people coming to arrest him indicates their fear of him on some level. It could be as little as 50 people, but it's still a lot of people to pick on. It's 5 to 1 ratio. Okay.
Mhm.
Plus the Roman soldiers and the temple guards are all armed. I think only 2 of the disciples have weapons on them. Okay, thought it was kind of interesting. These men came seeking the light of the world with torches and lanterns. And here, this guy is all open to see.
Mhm.
This is who I am. And they come in the dark and they're looking for the light of the world with torches and lanterns. I think the symbology there is kind of interesting. Okay, sidebar 1. This is where I go off on a tangent, but I'll bring it back together hopefully. What would Jesus and his disciples have seen as they walked out of the walls of Jerusalem and down into the Kidron Valley? The brook Kidron that night would have still been red with the blood of all the sacrificial lambs that are being sacrificed at the temple.
Oh, okay.
Okay, because there's a channel cut from the temple through the wall and down into the Kidron Valley to the brook Kidron to drain off all the blood. That's because there's a lot of lambs being slaughtered up there. Matter of fact, I think at this time it was still required to, well, I read the commentaries, I really can't tell. It was required to sacrifice them at the temple, then take them home and eat them. Some said that by this time people were allowed to, as long as it was in Jerusalem, they could slaughter them at their house. Okay. But needless to say, there were a lot of sacrificial lambs going. So they would have walked across the brook Kidron and stepped across that bed, whether it's on a bridge or whatever, but they would have seen all that blood. Okay.
Kevin, that number is about 250,000
250,000.
per Passover. I was in a previous lesson,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So with the 250,000 lambs?
lambs.
Wow. So it's pretty red down there.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was reading, just read up a little bit. This is a sidebar of a sidebar. Just exactly how the Passover started with the sacrificial lambs.
Mhm.
When Ezra initiated the Passover sacrifice, it was killed on the morning of the 14th and eaten on the evening of the 15th, but evolved into sacrifice late on the 14th and not eaten until the night of the 15th, which fits in to what's about to happen with Jesus. Okay, because these guys are leaving Jerusalem, going outside of the wall after they've eaten their Passover dinner. Okay, the trial will be at about 4 or 5 in the morning, which is the next day. He'll be crucified and taken down off the cross before the next nightfall. Okay, fits right in with all this, the dates on this. So here's our Passover lamb, our Passover lamb, walking over the blood of all the Passover lambs.
And it's interesting that you found out that it's on the same schedule
Mhm.
as the normal lambs.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus was on that same schedule.
Yeah, that's there's no coincidence. God does all this stuff. It's really, it's amazing. Okay. And I'll talk about the Kidron Valley a little bit. The Kidron Valley in scripture, and I think I have this in some of the slides, it was known as a place of death and destruction, and it was not good. Well, here's all the sacrificial blood of the lambs flowing down the middle of the Kidron Valley, maybe washing away some of that death and destruction, okay, symbolically.
Mhm.
Okay, it'll run into the Dead Sea eventually. So, but we're running downhill. So anyway, I want you to think about how this fits with the time frame with Jesus going to Gethsemane, arrested, sentenced, scourged, crucified, and removed from the cross. It all fits in with the Passover lamb schedule. I wanted to give you an idea of how this lays out physically. And I got another slide that'll show you this. They would have come out one of these gates here, probably this gate right here, out of the Temple Mount. Well, actually, somewhere on the wall of Jerusalem, maybe the Sheep Gate, I don't know. But they would have come across. This is the Kidron Valley running right here. Okay, and I think that must be the Brook Kidron right there. And some over here is the Garden of Gethsemane, although there's still some debate about which garden over here of about 4 is the Garden of Gethsemane. Okay, so, and then eventually, just to go forward in the thing, they will arrest him and take him to the Praetorium over here, where you can see where that it says Jesus trial before Pilate and Jesus mocked by soldiers. Okay, he'll go back to Herod's palace, which is at the other end of the Praetorium. And he'll go back to the Praetorium, into Caiaphas, and then, he'll end up back at the Praetorium before it's all over. So anyway, physically, they'll walk out of this wall of Jerusalem, across the Kidron Valley, and end up in the Garden of Gethsemane. Okay. And like I said, there is some doubt about which garden is Gethsemane, but they've done DNA testing, or what do they do on trees? And all the olive trees date from around 1000 AD, which would have meant they would have been provided, but all the DNA in all 4 gardens is the same tree. So interesting that.
And there's one tree there that is really huge and they say it's the oldest
Huh.
of all the olive trees. A friend of mine went on a tour up there.
Yeah.
And she has a picture of it. It's the most immense
Yeah, it's
olive tree.
He's all twisted.
Yeah, I think I saw it, but I'm not sure I got a picture of
I've seen it.
it.
I just had a question in your research, in verse 6, when it says, when Jesus said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground.
Mhm.
Did it say why they fell to the ground?
Well, I think, and I think I have something in another slide here, but you think about it, he's saying a form of I am. Is he using a form of God's name that they uncovered at the burning bush? Or did he purposely reveal a little bit of his deity so that they knew who he was? Don't know. We don't, only God and he know that. Did he reveal some of his deity? Or was it just the force of his authority? And he's speaking with authority. Lots there going like, they expected some deception. They thought, we're going to go in and look for Jesus, and, like this. And he says, I am he. No. Whoa. But I suspect the real truth is he revealed some of his deity at that moment. Let him know. Because these people were all in awe of him. Does that answer your question? Or okay. So yeah, the commentators, some of them believe that he actually used a form of I am, and he said, I am he. And they also think that he revealed some of his deity to them, the forcefulness of them.
That tracks, Kevin, because we know that names are in that culture are a direct correlation to the character of the person.
Mm-hmm.
And so if he did use a form of I am, then I would imagine something shone forth.
Yeah.
That would make a lot of sense.
Yeah. I can't help but think that Jesus, being God in the flesh, when he said I am he, it just naturally projected. Okay.
Could it have been because in the sentence above that, in parentheses, it says, and Judas was with them. Could it have had something to do with him being there?
With Judas being there?
Yeah, because it mentions it right in the beginning. And then it doesn't kind of say, okay, anything more about Judas.
Yeah.
So something was
It's an
significant
interesting
about
thought.
Judas being, or them mentioning Judas right
Yeah.
before that.
But
But who was Judas with?
He was
Then-
started to
well,
say,
then,
I
right,
people.
yeah.
That's the separation you're seeing between
Yeah.
Jesus and his
Yeah.
true disciples
Right.
and those who were not. And so, yeah,
I hadn't really looked at this passage as Judas was the one leading the bunch.
Mhm.
I thought he was more like the guide, not that he was the one that put this band together to come get Jesus.
yeah, he was the guy. He was the one that was going to betray him. They took him to get a proper ID. Now, Jesus screwed that all up by saying, I am he.
Mhm.
And he said it twice before Judas kissed him. The kiss was unnecessary.
Yeah.
You know, Jesus revealed himself. Now, one thing to your point, Judas is taken over. I'm getting ahead of myself. Judas is taken over in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Satan left off in the Garden of Eden. Okay, so Judas's presence there is important. Okay, and you know we believe he was strictly infilled with Satan when he did these deeds. Okay, so that help. Okay, okay. Now I'm going to cut to another one just because I like maps. This is a cross section looking at the Jerusalem from the south, and you can see the wall of the Temple Mount. You see the wall of, and you can actually see if you look through it, the outline of the original Mount Moriah upon which the temple is built. You see it's a fairly steep descent into the Kidron Valley,
Mhm.
and that's where the brook would be. And then the Garden of Gethsemane is at the base of the Mount of Olives. So that gives you an idea what the topography is.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of antique reclamation of that area that's dotted up there right now, finding all kinds of things that validate Jesus.
Yeah, they're finding a lot of Jewish history that confirms that the Jews were there, you know, and which really ticks off the Muslims and the Arabs right now. Okay, this is a picture. Up there is the wall, the city of Jerusalem, and you see the steep descent into the Kidron, and then going that way is down, I believe, to the Dead Sea. Okay, and then you almost see it's rising up to the Mount of Olives here. Sidebar 2, what might be significant about crossing the Kidron Valley? And I think this is, well, I think I kind of touched on this, okay? In 2 Kings 23, 1-6, King Josiah orders a priest to remove all items related to the worship of Baal, Asherah, all the starry hosts to be removed from the temple and burned in the Kidron Valley. Okay, so these things were burned and destroyed in Kidron. Asherah pole was also destroyed there. Remember, we talked about the Asherah pole in one of our studies. 1 Kings 15:13 and 2 Chronicles, King Asa and King Hezekiah similarly disposed of idols there. The Kidron Valley is seen in scripture as a place of executions, common graves, people who are too poor to be buried any other place, death, sorrow, and judgment. Okay, this is kind of changing it with everything that we just talked about. Could Jesus be symbolically be trotting underfoot, conquering the dead and buried evil gods on his way to Gethsemane? He's walking across these disposed of gods, okay, and the dead gods. So he's on his way to Gethsemane and the cross. I think the symbology there is pretty intense. You know, I use commentaries, but one of my greatest weapons in my side pocket or my back pocket is sterile rice. And we went to the Rangers game on Wednesday with the widowers, and I would say, hey, I got these sideboards I found, and they're not really in commentaries, but they just occurred to me. And I ran them by him, and he goes, oh yeah, that's perfect. He says the symbolic nature, it just is riffed with it. So I felt pretty good about putting this together because a lot of these sideboards are stuff that came out of my head. So I wanted to run it back. But one thing he did tell me, the prayer that we studied last week with Jerry, that was mostly related to the disciples as they walked down out of Jerusalem and into the Kidron Valley. And I did not realize that. So anyway. Okay, arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. We talked about this. He went forward to meet his enemies. He didn't wait for them to come to him. It's interesting. He went to the garden because Judas knew where that was. He could have waited in the room they were in, what they were having their Passover meal. Judas would have brought him back there, but he wanted to go pray, and he knew Judas would bring him to him. Okay, Judas still kissed him, although he had already identified himself. Okay, I am he, version of I am, to your point, what we just talked about. Did Jesus reveal a bit of his deity? I believe he did. That's up to you and whoever else in the commentaries wants to argue it. Or was it merely his display of authority and aggression? I think it was his deity.
It could have been both.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Well,
it was both.
With deity, you're going to have authority,
Yeah.
you know? Okay, and when I say aggression, usually when you're being arrested, you're either stupid or you're mild and meek and don't get aggressive with the police officer, right? I think the fact that he's being forthright with them is a form of aggression. Okay.
Kevin, you know what that is too. It's a foreshadowing of his second coming.
Mm.
Because Satan will bring everybody together in one place
Mhm.
and he will come and face them.
Yeah.
But the outcome will be very different in that point.
Good
So
point.
it's interesting, and how I love your, thought process of him trotting on sin, trotting on the idols, the
Mhm.
false gods and all of that.
Yeah.
That's exactly what's gonna happen in the end,
Yeah.
is he will put every knee will bow,
Yeah.
every tongue will confess that Jesus is.
I'm gonna have to add another slide to this. That's good.
Yeah.
Skill that. Okay, so he identifies himself again twice, and he tells them to let his disciples go. That most of them take the advantage of it and just split, except for, we believe, Peter and John. Okay, verse 10, Peter acts in a worldly way. I'll take care of this. He doesn't realize Jesus has got this under control, and he cuts off the right ear of Malchus. And I wondered what the specificity was of how he knew the servant's name, why he said the right ear. The truth is that John was probably very well acquainted with the high priest, had been in his home and knew his servant. And that's why he was like that. Because when Peter is out and the lady says, "Aren't you also one of his servants?" What that doesn't really tell you here is John is coming back to the door and is trying to let Peter in. And this is the doorkeeper. The lady that asked him that was the doorkeeper. So when Peter lies, he kind of screws himself up, because he could have just said, yeah, there would have been no harm, no foul. He could have gone in with John and saw all the events taking place. But his lying sets him apart from Jesus.
Well, in what world would Peter be able to cut off Malchus' right ear and not be arrested for that?
Yeah. Well, he's just lucky he had a paramedic called Jesus right there to pick his ear and put it back on.
And Malchus is probably so dumbfounded that, did that really just happen?
Yeah.
It was a shock.
Huh? So anyway, yeah, and so Jesus did that so that Peter would not have any issues later, okay? And because he's Jesus, he can do that. Okay, so Jesus uses this as a lesson in verse 11 when he says, is it not time for me to drink from my Father's cup? Okay, he's
I'm just
trying to teach Peter a lesson. Don't be so worldly.
Mhm.
Do the hard thing, okay?
Mhm.
And that's what we're gonna do here. I'll follow my Father's will. Okay, so John,
Isn't there
Yeah.
like, it seems like there's a miracle that happens right here, because Peter pulls out a sword in
Mhm.
front of a whole bunch of soldiers.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
They don't just run him through.
yeah,
And I think it's because Jesus is there and
Mhm.
is in complete control of the
Yeah.
situation.
well, plus a sword is a weapon of proximity, it's not like a gun, like somebody pulls a gun and six guys shoot him from 50 feet away,
Well,
the sword-
again, it's an affront to the Romans
Mhm.
and how he didn't get arrested
Yeah.
for having it, all of that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. There's a miracle that Jesus just picked up the ear and put it back on and said, put your sword away,
Yeah,
and nothing happens.
Yeah.
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 The Romans don't go
Yeah.
after
Well,
Peter or
they
anything.
may still be
Yeah.
under
Put the ear back.
that pressure and power that Jesus has.
Right,
developed.
right.
They
Yeah.
may still be frozen.
Yeah.
Remember, Jesus is in control of everything that's happening.
Mhm.
He needs Peter to be going out and doing a job later.
Yeah.
So he supernaturally,
So in
divinely protects him.
another gospel where he put the ear back?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so Jesus uses this as a chance to teach Peter. Sometimes the hard lessons you gotta follow. So John here is contrasting Peter and Judas. John portrays Judas as the one who betrayed him, repeatedly calls him that. Judas is calculating, he's cunning, he's planned all this out. He's known what he's gonna do for a long time, okay? There's nothing Jesus can do for Judas at this point. Remember at the dinner, right up to the point where he says, what you're going to do, go and do quickly. He could have probably saved Judas, okay? But Judas has just decided he'd rather have 30 pieces of silver because that's how much the land I want costs than to follow Jesus. So he's voluntarily cut himself off from salvation.
Well, isn't it a thing about free will that the Lord gives up all of us?
Yeah, he knew at that point that Judas was never going to come around. So there's nothing he can do for him. So that's Judas compared to Peter. Peter's impetuous. He does what's in the moment. Okay.
He's a hothead.
He's foolish. I should, now I shouldn't call Peter foolish, I found out.
Foolish, idiot, stupid.
He
Yeah.
tries to fix the situation by worldly means,
Yeah.
by fighting it out.
Didn't work.
Mhm.
With all us guys probably have been through that age that everything can be, solved to a fist fight, but that's the way he is. He's young, he's impetuous, and he cuts off Malchus's ear. Okay.
Yeah, we keep forgetting that he's still in his 20s.
Yeah,
I know.
boy, if I think how stupid I was in my 20s, I just think, okay, Jesus fixes Peter's problems by healing the ear. So he's not arrested. Okay. He also takes the opportunity to teach Peter that sometimes the hard things are what you have to go through. We think as Christians, all our problems are solved. God's going to take care of us. But what God really does is teach us to go through the hard times and do things that are difficult because they're the right things to do, not because they're the easy things to do.
And
Okay?
isn't that the premise that we've all learned as Christians?
Yep.
Yeah.
That we
Hopefully
follow
we have.
Jesus, and it's not easy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's hard.
But we know we have to do
know.
it.
We know
Yeah,
that. We
okay.
know
That's how
how
the
to.
story ends.
So
That's
going
right.
to the cross isn't even easy for Jesus. In some human side of him, he's got to be going, oh, this is going to hurt. This is going to be terrible. And not only the pain of having my hands and feet nailed to the cross, but all the pain of bearing all that sin of every man, woman, and child who is ever going to live. I mean, he knows from a human side, he's going to go through all that. I can't imagine what that would feel like to
Think of his mother.
Only the
Man.
God of heaven
okay.
could absorb.
Yeah, he's the only one that could. None of us could. So anyway, it's not easy even for Jesus, but it's going to fix everything. So we know that now. Here's a garden. I think it's the Garden of Gethsemane, but it gives you an idea of what the gardens might have looked like. I got a feeling this was probably a little bit more manicured than the one that we are typically, but it's beautiful. To somebody's point, there's the kind of trees you see in it, kind of these old knotted, these are probably dated from around 1000 AD right now.
What kind of trees are those? Do you-
Olive.
Olive?
Gethsemane means something oil press or
Olive press.
olive press. Yeah. Okay. So, okay. This is an interesting point. Sidebar 3. We're gonna get to the end of the lesson someday. The Garden of Eden versus Gethsemane. John does not even refer to Gethsemane. Says they went into a garden. Okay, why is that? Well, I think he wants to evoke a comparison to Eden. Okay, we have what happened in the Garden of Eden with man falling, and now we have a garden and we have a man that's going to deliver us. Where are you gonna? So,
Mhm.
okay. First Adam lost everything. We remember Jerry talked about first Adam and last Adam or second Adam. The last Adam has restored everything. It's already been done. We know that. Okay. God announced his plan to send his son into the world to save what Adam lost. Genesis 3:15. I'll put enmity between you and the woman and between your seed and her seed. Remember that? He announced what he was going to do. God required the shedding of animal blood to show without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sin. And I mentioned Genesis 4:4 because that's where they're talking about the difference between Cain and Abel and so forth. The final remission of sin fell on the last Adam, Jesus, and that's where we're heading.
And the Christianity that went forward
Mhm.
never had to shed animal blood again
Mhm.
for any reason.
No, it's been done.
Yeah.
It's done once for all. God showed Adam mercy, and this is really important. God showed Adam mercy. He could have gone, angels, get your swords. This humankind experience has not worked out like I thought it would. Let's start over. Let's maybe we'll go with gerbils or duck-billed platypus. Because these humans really screwed it up, but he didn't show us mercy. Okay. So arrest, judgment, and execution fell on the last Adam, Jesus. Okay, interesting sidebar, I think. Okay, more sidebar. Okay, Judas picks up in the second garden where Satan left off in Eden. To your point. Okay, when Adam sinned, he tried to run and hide. Both he and Eve, they tried to run and hide when God walked in the garden in the cool of the morning. They tried to run and hide from God. Jesus stepped forward in Gethsemane to his accusers on our behalf. He knew he had to do it. Okay. I'm not sure if I got this right, but Adam tried to blame Eve. Jesus asked for his disciples to be let go. Okay, big difference there. Basically, this Garden of Eden versus Gethsemane is loss of God's blessing versus redemption. Okay, sidebars, then we're going to tie all this symbolism together. Crossing the brook Kidron, we're talking about our Passover lamb crossing over the blood of all the sacrifices from the temple, running down the Kidron Valley and washing over all those places where the idols have been burned and people have, committed executions and buried and all that. Crossing over the Kidron Valley, he's walking over, conquering all the death, sin, and judgment associated with that place. The blood of the sacrificial lambs is flowing down, and I didn't have room to put it down, but it's flowing down toward the Dead Sea. So it's washing out the entire, symbolically, washing out the entire Kidron Valley. Okay. Then we have the Garden of Eden, the first Adam, the fall. The Garden of Gethsemane, the last Adam, and redemption and salvation. So this is a little undercurrent of a theme running through this. It's just not a historical set of events, but it all ties in there. It's just like God to put all this stuff in there and tie it all together. It's fascinating. Okay, this is typically the way we think of the Garden of Gethsemane story. We think about Christ praying and crying and sweating blood and asking for the cup to be taken for him, immediately saying, no, never mind, I'll take this cup. Okay, so that's okay, and this is the way we see it in John. Now, this is where he starts in John. He doesn't even talk about Christ crying and praying and everything. He starts out as a very authoritative Christ. He's ready to go. He's ready to go get the job done. And you can see him right behind Christ is Peter, and you can see him pulling the sword out of his sheath right there. And so it fits the story very well. Okay. Could somebody read 12 through 12 through 18?
Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it would be good if one man died for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus because this disciple was known to the high priest. He went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the girl on duty, and brought Peter in. You are not one of his disciples, are you? The girl at the door asked Peter. He replied, I am not. It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire that they had made to keep warm.
Yeah.
Peter also was standing with them, warming himself.
Yeah, thank you. And then this is where we know that this is probably John that went back out to the door and talked to the girl who was keeping the door. It says the disciple who is known to the high priest, and then I think it says it again there. But he went out and spoke to her who kept the door and brought Peter in. Then the servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, you are not also one of this man's disciples. In other words, you're not also like him, one of this man's disciples like him, John. So we were fairly certain it is Peter and John. Okay. It's kind of interesting that he went over and warmed himself with the soldiers. He's going to be speaking with a Galilean accent. He's going to stick out like a guy from the Bronx in Dallas, Texas. So they got a pretty good idea who he is. So they ask him to. Okay, why did they take Jesus to Annas first? Anybody, any guesses?
They had to follow some sort of Jewish trial kind of procedure.
But Annas is no longer the high priest.
But,
He's the father of Caiaphas, father-in-law of Caiaphas.
yeah, but he fills in pretty good.
Yeah, well,
He's
yeah.
like the vice
But
president.
Jesus is kind
Oh, dear.
Plausible deniability.
of, yeah.
That's why they went to Annas
Oh,
first.
really? Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
I think and Annas had been high priest,
Mhm.
and so he knew all the ins and outs. He knew how he could set it up in a way
Mhm.
that it would flow the way they wanted it to.
Yeah,
And so I think it started there. It was kind of like a back channel.
yeah, they went to him for his wisdom and how to do things, even if it's not quite on the up and up. I think I would say, yeah, there's a couple, that's a good one. The one I thought is, Annas has been a high priest, but the Romans removed him for corruption. Okay, so, but, okay, 5 of his sons would be high priests, and currently it's Caiaphas. So that's where they should have taken him technically, but they didn't, okay, for that reason. And, okay, did Jesus cleansing the temple cost Annas business and profits?
Sure.
I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Ah, ding, 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 light bulb just went on. Okay, so they're thinking he's got a grudge. He'll figure out a way to get him. Okay. Okay. And the trial of Jesus before the Jewish leaders. Okay, and remember, they don't even touch on Caiaphas' conversation with Jesus in this book or in this chapter. Okay, so the high priest then asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world. Okay, I always taught in synagogues and in the temple where the Jews always meet, and in secret I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said. So he's speaking very forcefully and directly. You know what I said. You've talked to these people. Why are you asking me? Okay, so he's showing great authority in front of Annas right now, of course. And of course, one of the officers struck him with the palm of his hand. I can't imagine striking God in the flesh. Yeah, that's going to cost you somewhere down the road. Okay. Okay. So anyway, he says, do you speak to the high priest like that? And Jesus calmly says, if I have spoken evil, bear witness of evil, but if well, why did you strike me? Okay. So again, he's very forceful and honest. Okay. Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas. I got a feeling he's going like, I think I need to get rid of him. You know, I think there's not much I can do. I'm going to pass this on. Annas is not the high priest, but he's still the power behind the power. We have some of that going on in politics today. Okay. He questions Jesus illegally. There are no witnesses. Okay. You have to have at least 2 witnesses. It's illegal. So he's not doing what he should be doing. Okay. He questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teachings. He's hoping that he can get him to screw up. Good luck. Okay. Jesus responds openly and honestly. I've not spoken in secret. You can ask anybody what I've talked, and I'll tell you. Okay. His honesty is met with a physical blow. He continues to respond even though he's just been punched, and he answers honestly and directly, maybe aggressively. If I've done wrong, tell me how. If not, why did you strike me? Okay. So Annas probably figures he needs to get Jesus off his hands at this point. So he sends him at this point. See, does he send him to Caiaphas? I think he sends him to Caiaphas, who sends him to Pilate. Okay. What's Peter doing while Jesus is in with Annas and Caiaphas? Here's the first one. Then the service girl who kept the door said to Peter, you are not also one of this man's disciples. He said, I'm not. Why didn't he say, yeah, I am? There's no crime in being one of his followers yet. He could have gone on in and not been out there, but he denies him. He chooses to lie. Okay. What happens when we lie? We got to tell another lie to cover it up, and another and another. Okay. So that's the fault. That's what it's.
Fear is a terrible word.
What's that?
Fear.
Yeah. And then again, what's he doing when he goes over and he's warming his hands? And he denies him twice when he's doing that. And one of the guys that was standing there was a relative of Malchus. Said, weren't you with him in the garden? And no, wasn't me. Somebody looked a lot like me, but not me. So anyway, this is the famous part where the rooster crows after the 3rd denial. Okay. John contrasts Peter and Jesus during his trial with Annas. Okay. Peter was asked 3 times a simple question. If he'd answered truthfully, he probably would have been no harm, no foul. Would have been allowed to come in with John and listen to the proceedings, but he was determined to do it his way. He thought he could lie his way out of it. One lie led to the next. His lies must have led him to the greatest remorse of his life. I mean, I know he straightened out and went on and did great things, but you had to think every once in a while he was thinking to himself, why did I do that? I denied my Savior. That had to be tough.
But he too is an example for everybody.
Yeah.
He messed up.
There is forgiveness and there is comeback. Yeah. Okay. Jesus was asked illegal and devious questions, but answered openly and honestly, okay? He was met even with a physical rebuke, okay? Yet he acts the same way, he calmly, openly, honestly answers the guard who struck him. So we have a guy who lies by default, and we have a guy who's honest by default. Okay, so he's comparing that. It's interesting the things that John wanted to bring out in his version of the gospel versus the other guy. So, okay. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the Praetorium. Praetorium is where the Pilate would live, the Roman governor. And it was early morning, but they did not go into the Praetorium lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. It's really weird because they've already should have eaten it. By the time they get to the Praetorium, it's 4 or 5 in the morning, they think. Okay. They should have already eaten the Passover dinner the night before. And they should, but it's referring to something else. And yes, ma'am.
Ask you something, and I probably should know this, but I don't. For the Passover dinner, did they eat the lambs they had sacrificed?
I think they ate them on the next night because they're going into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Is that correct? Yeah. And so the Passover is followed immediately by the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which plays into the fact right here. They don't want to defile themselves by going into a Gentile's house that might have leaven in it. And when we read Exodus, we learned even today, Jewish people will sell all their leaven, even leaven dealers will sell all their leaven to a Gentile to get it out of their house. And they will go through and just microscopically clean their house to make sure there's no leaven in there. Okay, so I think that's what's coming into play here. They will eat the lamb this night, okay, and then the night that's coming after Jesus has been taken down from the cross.
And referring back, Old Testament, the Passover is when the angel of death came.
Mhm.
They put the blood on the doors. You
Yeah.
know, Moses and Aaron and all of them told them what to do. And so that was the feast. That became the feast of Passover.
Mhm.
And then the Feast of Unleavened Bread was hurry, bake it, we're out of here.
Yeah.
It's the Exodus
Yeah.
from Egypt.
Yeah, they
So,
left Egypt without putting leaven in their dough. They had to leave so fast.
Right.
Okay, and leaven makes the dough rise, but we know that leaven is a symbol of sin. That's why they get the leaven out of their houses. Okay, did I answer your question? Okay.
I didn't know if they just let the lamb, since they used them as a sacrifice.
Now, if you remember,
I didn't know if they really ate them, or
Yeah.
if they just let them.
no, they ate them.
Okay.
Yeah, you see, it went from evolved from when Ezra first said it, that they killed them on the morning of the 14th and ate them the night of the 14th. And later on, and I don't know where the switchover came, but they killed them on the evening of the 14th and ate them on the night of the 15th, which will be the night that's coming up after Jesus is executed. Okay, which ties in really well with Jesus being the Passover lamb. Okay. So anyway, this is an interesting dichotomy. It's probably about 4 or 5 in the morning. Passover was the previous evening. Okay, the Passover meal. Okay, they did not want to enter the Roman building for fear of defilement. We talked about the leaven and all that, and everybody understands that. Okay, they probably already eaten their Passover meal. Probably refers to the ensuing feast of unleavened bread, which will go on for 7 days. They didn't want to enter the Gentile building for fear that it contained leaven. This is really interesting. Contrast, that they might not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. Should have eaten it. We've talked about that. Referring to the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, leaving Egypt so quickly when they were let go that they took all their dough, but they didn't put leaven in it to make it rise. So that's where this festival comes from. Okay, it follows directly after the Passover. Okay, John's depicting, this is a contrast, he's depicting a group of sanctimonious men who had no moral guilt about murdering an innocent man, but they were really concerned, superficially pious enough to be concerned about ceremonial defilement. Okay, basically, let me just go ahead and read that. Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered and said to him, "If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you." That doesn't make any sense. That's like saying, I must still have money. I got checks left, you know, it doesn't follow, you know? Then Pilate said to them, "You take him and judge him according to your law." Therefore, the Jews said to him, "It's not lawful for us to put anyone to death," that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled when he spoke, signifying by what death he would die. And what they're talking about here is Jesus has predicted that he will die on the cross. He will be lifted up, and we'll look at that here in just a second. The Jewish method of execution is stoning, okay? But they're not allowed to execute him on a holiday, and they really have no charges against him. So a lot of things are working out. They want him dead, but they don't have any real reason for making it happen. Okay, and I just picked this up. This is 800 years before Jesus' birth. For dogs have surrounded me, the congregation of the wicked has enclosed me, they pierced my hands and my feet. Crucifixion wasn't even a method of execution at this point. What's he talking about? I can count on my bones, they look and stare at me, they divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Remember, the Roman guards did do that. Okay. The Jewish leaders bring Jesus before Pilate without an accusation. They're hoping the Romans will kill him because they cannot. Okay. Jesus predicts his own method of death, Roman, not Jewish. And that's in John 12, 32 to 33. And if I'm lifted up from the earth, I will draw all peoples to myself. When he's lifted up, put up on the cross. This, he said, signifying by what death he would die. Okay, so he's predicting his own death. Okay, this is interesting. This is a question that should have tripped Jesus up. If Jesus wasn't Jesus, it probably would have. Okay, then Pilate entered the praetorium again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself, or did others tell you this concerning me?" Okay, Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" You get the feeling Pilate's kind of on his side here. Okay. Okay, so anyway, this is interesting. I try to do a chain of thought, how this conversations go. Pilate asks, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Do you ask this about your own accord? That's the first question Jesus asked him. Are you asking as a Roman? Are you asking if I claim to be an earthly king? If Jesus were to answer no, Pilate would think he was no king at all. Okay. Or did others say it to you about me, meaning the Jews? Did they tell him this? Are you asking him because the Jews said so? If so, I'm about to answer you in verses 36 and 37. He didn't really say that. That I am king in a spiritual sense, the Messiah. Okay. If Jesus had answered with just a yes, Pilate would think he was a king according to Jewish standards, and he would be a threat to Caesar. So Jesus really knocked this thing out of the ballpark the way he answered this question, and Pilate could find no fault in him. Okay, Jesus answered directly. This is where he tells it. Jesus answered, "My kingdom's not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I would not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Okay, beautiful answer. Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Now Pilate's assuming that he's a kingdom of a spiritual kingdom. Pilate asks him again, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Oh, he's setting up Pilate now. Are you a truthful man? Are you interested in the truth? Jesus set the hook to test Pilate, see if he was interested in the truth. A cynical answer and a seeming acquittal. Okay. Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" That sounds like something you would hear from college age kids. What is truth? Truth is relative. Here, tell me what truth is. Your truth is not my truth. Blah, 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 blah. You know, so Pilate is either incapable of having a system of judgment or a religious base to understand what truth is. He has no moral compass to make this kind of judgment of what truth is. So he's got really no way to think his way out of this situation. And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said, "I find no fault at all. This should have been an acquittal." Okay, he should have been free. Unfortunately, we're dealing with a politician, and there's a background to this. Herod had good connections to Rome, and Pilate had been overridden several times before in favor of Herod. Okay, so he's walking the tightrope here. Okay, so unfortunately, we're dealing with a politician, and his next move smacks of political compromise. Uh-oh, this never is any good. Okay. But you have a custom, that word, but, he's still thinking, his mouth's moving. He's gonna say something we don't want to hear. But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews? And then they all cried, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. Okay, that key word there is but. If he had just shut his mouth, he would have been okay. And you see Barabbas on the right side of the screen. Whoever that actor that played him was really good. He really came off as maniacal. So here's the other thing that might have been going on in Pilate's. This is not from this version of the gospel, but in Matthew, he says Pilate's wife came to him and said, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him saying, "Have nothing to do with that just man. For I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him." In other words, she saw in the dream that he was a just man. Okay, so Pilate's got that working against him, maybe. Okay, and in John 19, 1-4, he's going to attempt to placate the Jewish leadership. This is Pilate's attempt to placate the Jewish leaders. So when Pilate took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put him on his head, and they put him on a purple robe, they all said, "Hail, King of the Jews," and they struck him with their hands. Then Pilate went out again and said to them, "Behold, I'm bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him." He's trying to let Jesus go. So this is Pilate's final attempt to free Jesus and placate the Jewish leadership. The takeaways. It's important that we see Jesus in this account, John, as authoritative, bold, and determined out to carry out his Father's will and his plan for salvation. Jesus is always in control of the events taking place. Like I said, there's a lot of places in here that he could have walked away and not gone to the cross. He wanted to go to the cross. He needed to go to the cross. He would go to the cross. Okay, many things could have derailed Jesus' path to the cross, but he kept the plan on course, even when humans were trying to screw it up. Okay, it's important to remember that God showed mercy to the first Adam in the Garden of Eden, and that he had a plan to correct the fall with the last Adam, Jesus, beginning with the events in the Garden of Gethsemane. Okay, hopefully you see that a little bit differently now than before. Okay, I know it helped me to read it and really study it and see what's going on. There's a background story and there's an overlay story. So anyway, that's it.
Thank you for joining us. Please remember to like and to subscribe.